another Rachel. Okay, so this evening we are very, very fortunate to have the company of Dean Spade. Thank you so much, Dean, for joining us. We are truly deeply excited by this opportunity. We're all, I think, fairly new to mutual aid as a concept, as in a few months. And we quickly discovered your work, and it's been so useful. And personally, I would like to thank you from the, the bottom of my heart, as it were, for how generous you are in making your thinking and your materials available via the internet. There's so much stuff for us to, to have a look at and to read. It's absolutely brilliant. So Dean, for those of you who don't know, Dean is a lawyer based in Seattle. He's a professor of law. He's an activist. He's an organizer, an activist mainly in the area of gender rights and gender politics, but in relation to other things too. And he is a writer and a creator, and importantly, I think, a co-creator of materials on mutual aid and on other aspects of activism in relation to, as I say, mutual aid, but also in relation to prison abolition, queer liberation, disability justice, transformative justice, many things. He's received numerous commendations and awards, and has authored 2 books at the very least, and I think also produced a couple of anthologies or more, or provided written chapters for anthologies. The book that is most useful to us, I would say, at the moment is this one, which is fantastic, absolutely brilliant, a veritable manual full of wisdom and experience on the topic of mutual aid. And I think you've been active in this kind of area for sort of 2 decades or more, is that right, Dean? So you do have an absolute wealth of experience, don't you? That's and I can hardly think of a question that we might not ask you that you wouldn't have something to say on, so that's brilliant. So I think one of the things I've loved about your work is your clarity of thinking and your generosity and your compassion, but also, I have to say, you seem to be so open to being questioned and challenged as well. So I think that's just a wonderful kind of balance between kind of holding opinions and judgments about things, at the same time being open enough to kind of be willing to reflect on those and be challenged by them. So I think that's brilliant. So we can all so much learn from each other, I believe. So I would say that following this meeting, this presentation and this discussion, I can highly recommend to anybody that, if you want to do any follow-up thinking, there are so many materials that Dean's made available online for you to, kind of augment your understanding of what we're looking at today. Okay, that's enough enough from me from saying that. So can I now invite Rob to introduce Jubilee as you see fit, Rob, and Islington, and then followed up by Si to talk about what we've been doing in Sheffield.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Rob Callender. My pronouns are he, him. I'm actually sitting in Islington today. So I guess I'll just talk really briefly about where some of this work came from. We started, a group of us met through the environmental movement. We'd done a lot of work with the environmental movement in the UK. Some of us then sort of moved away from that, and because of really wanting to center justice in that movement and finding that sort of different narratives weren't getting through. And then we went to work with a Pan-African group called Africans Rising, and we started working really strongly with them back in 2020. And then following some direct action supporting their demands, we then went on to launch the Jubilee movement, which was specifically to look at debt cancellation. One of the big demands that came out of working with Africans Rising was from the continent, really wanting debt cancellation. So it actually started in very much in terms of global debt and national debt, rather than on the domestic level. But it clearly, linking all of that stuff through to climate, linking that to reparations, linking that to the history of colonialism, it it was very obvious to us how all of those things intersected. We then started really delving deeply into how debt worked and how the debt system worked, and quite clearly the UK is historically and today one of the largest players in that, probably second only to the United States, in terms of the legacy of how debt law has been written, and also where the jurisdictions still are. So that was really kind of amazing. We launched the Jubilee for Climate movement on the 15th of October, which is the anniversary of the assassination of Thomas Sankara, who was a huge debt abolitionist within what was then called Burkina Faso, what is now called Burkina Faso. And so we started working into debt, and we then looked at our tactics really heavily, and we looked into how we could, align the need for this sort of message, not only between that sort of nation level debt, but also on the domestic level, because at that time already in 2021, it was clear that the cost of living crisis was biting, and many of us have personal experiences of debt. And so we were looking at how that was affecting people, and what the best way was to create, to not just do actions that are aiming at, putting a message in front of powers that be, but aren't, don't have an incentive to change, but actually equipping and helping to inspire communities to equip themselves, to take care, to change that system, and to relieve that burden. And so mutual aid was the most obvious way in which we looked at. Obviously, this is a quite quick run through of the history of it. There's lots of different theoretical parts to it and analysis, and we looked a lot at the Black Power movement and how that different from sort of white power narratives, and we looked at lots of different elements to it. But ultimately, we arrived at this idea of mutual aid, and as Darcy put so well, like, we're very indebted to you for the work you did there, and just started looking into how we could make that work. And we did various experiments, and one of the first one was in Islington. A few of us either have links here or live here today, and started working to, in this case, sort of just, we cooked food, but we also went to local businesses. And capitalism, one of the byproducts of capitalism, along with exploitation and all sorts of horror, is a huge amount of excess. And so we found that businesses actually had a huge amount of food that they had at the end of the day, others that they were able to donate, and we sort of felt that taking food from these places and giving them to the communities, the people who needed them, was a gift that we could give. And so we did that, and we started the end of the month meal campaign in March, which was also really looking, because the end of the month is the hardest times. It's when the money runs out and the bills come in. So we did that, and it was really with the aim of trying to equip communities to become self-sustaining. And it's taken a lot of work, and it's been super hard, very rewarding, but it's incredibly hard. And we've made some amazing relationships along the way. And this is a good moment for me to hand on, because there's then also another group came out of that, which is up in Sheffield.
Thanks, Rob. That's great. That's a really good encapsulation of a lot of work that you put in over those first 2 years. I'd just like to say thanks, Dean, as well, for turning up and for giving us your time. And Darcy gave a really lovely introduction to you. It's really lovely to be in the same space and to be able to talk to you tonight. I just want to give a little bit of context about Sheffield and the Jubilee group that we've formed here, because I think, and also to raise some of the challenges and the problems that we face, as well as the good stuff, because I think that will help to maybe shape some of the discussion, so we can get some really something useful out of the evening. So firstly, about Sheffield, it's a northern city and has a very different dynamic to it to London, which is the metropolitan centre. it's an area which has got quite high levels of social deprivation. That was made far, far worse over the last 40 years with the decimation of traditional working class industries, coal mining, steel, manufacturing. And so communities are frequently quite fractured. So that's the sort of like the bleak stuff. It's on a positive note, it's a city with a really great heart. It was once known as the Socialist Republic of South Yorkshire. It gained national significance for communities coming together to resist the decimation of street trees, which are a really important part of the city for people. And there's a really active campaigning community. And it's within that context that the Jubilee movement was able to, I think, establish itself outside of London as a sort of like as another centre of focus. So, yeah, Rob's given a good introduction on the history of it. We all initially probably came out of the environmental movement, but I think it would be fair to say that we all struggled with the single issue nature of mainstream environmentalism. We were looking at our work within the movement as a part of a struggle for system change. And I think that's kind of like important, that there is a campaigning focus to the work that we're doing. When Jubilee for Climate was launched last year with, Rob didn't mention it, but he did an amazing climb of St. Paul's Cathedral and hung a really huge banner outside of it. And it was really, and then there was some really great speeches and talks down below, which kind of, it felt really meaningful. Together, we've kind of focused upon this, upon mutual aid as a strategy, not just to address immediate survival needs, but also to build the connections with marginalised and vulnerable communities. In particular in Sheffield, it's been with the asylum and migrant communities, but also with the trade unions, which I'm not going to call vulnerable, and the working class, social justice campaigns. And we kind of wanted to do that right from the start. So our end of the month meal didn't actually take place until July, whereas in Islington it started earlier. We're very conscious of trying to, of how to create inclusivity from the outset rather than trying to build it in at a later stage. So we have worked with the African and Caribbean community in one small area of Sheffield in order to kind of co-create this thing that we're doing. We kind of worked in 3 strands. One is solidarity, which is the end of the month meal, kind of trying to address immediate need. That's probably felt the most, well, I think it's been the biggest part of our work. It's probably felt for most people the most fulfilling part. I think it's fair to say it is at this stage a model. It's not, it's only addressing a very, very small part of the need. And we really want it to grow and to be in far more places within Sheffield. I suppose the second aspect of it is using mutual aid as a form of resistance. And therefore we've been engaging with, talking with communities, mainly the migrant and asylum community, around issues such as how to build a stop deportation campaign. So that could be meaningful and prevent trying to resist the hostile environment. It's at quite an early stage. And then the third stage of it is trying to create resilience, trying to prepare for future threats, and to be and to really develop local power, community power to resist as part of it. And I think that would be, I think there might be some people from Sheffield who aren't part of Jubilee, but who are engaged in mutual aid in the city. And I think it would be really lovely to hear from your experience, because I think some of the food sovereignty stuff has been absolutely brilliant. Just to finish, I just want to talk about three very small, to put three things into the mix. I think we've been feeling a great pressure to grow, and that I think has its own problems in terms of how to deliver mutual aid when you're actually trying to build a campaign at the same time. And I wonder whether that sense of growth is something which you've got experience of, Dean, and how to manage that. The second part is meeting the survival needs doesn't always necessarily feel that it's creating that revolutionary challenge to the system. It doesn't always feel clear. And I think because most of us have come out of a campaigning background, an activist background, it can be quite easy when things feel urgent to feel that we need to resort to a different set of tactics, to return back to sort of like NVDA and protest, which I think we should be doing. But at the same time, it feels like it can suck energy out of the mutual aid component of what we're doing. I wonder if you've got experience of that. And the last bit is, as I said, we wanted to create meaningful relationships within communities from the outset, but a consequence of that has actually been, for many of us, we're not doing this work within our community. And I think there's some tension there as well, as how to actually can this work be done when you're outside of your community? So that's sort of like three areas that maybe we can pick up together in the discussion. Thank you.
Those are such great questions. And thank you all. Thank you, Darcy and Rob and Sai. I just looked up the picture of your banner drop, which I realized I saw when it happened, but I hadn't remembered it. So cool. I'm so glad to be with you all. Yeah, I'm just going to take about 20 minutes and just bring us through a few of the general ideas that I think might be helpful. And some of them will touch on some of the things that have been raised as tensions and questions, and some of that we'll get to afterwards. Let me just share my screen with you all. Here you go. So, just sharing a few images along the way. I think it's always useful, right? I think a lot of us, when we think about mutual aid right now, we have images in our head from 2021, 2020 and 2021, and so many mutual aid projects started, people doing food and delivering medicine to each other and things like that. In the context of the COVID pandemic, I think the reason the kind of concept of mutual aid like really mainstreamed at that time is that COVID happened everywhere in the world at once, essentially. I mean, not evenly, but mutual aid is always very present in disasters, but those are often regional, like an earthquake or a flood. But COVID was a disaster everywhere at once. And so people really started naming this tendency that humans have to take care of each other, which is extremely beautiful. So yeah, we saw a lot of images like this of food projects. These are all different beautifully decorated free food fridges that are in different parts of New York City. I just love the images, the ways people are so creative with this and so thoughtful. We also saw this, I'm particularly thinking about the US where I am, in 2020, when the rebellion against anti-Black violence and against police violence popped off in the US, we saw other kinds of mutual aid really visible, like, for example, street medics, right? Which is like a kind of mutual aid project where people support each other with basic health needs when we're protesting. So you see someone here being treated for a tear gas injury from the police. Street medics often carry masks and water, and they just support people with all kinds of, and they make it possible for us all to be out there and fight the cops and stand up for what we believe in. So it's another type of mutual aid project, just really bringing that to Sai's question about the link between direct action and campaigning and fighting the power and supporting each other, that there's many aspects of that, but this is an example of that. Also during 2020, like I think more people than have ever given to bail funds in the history of the US gave in the first few weeks of the rebellion. Bail funds are money to help people get bailed out of jail who are arrested, so you don't have to stay in jail until your trial or until your plea. They make a huge difference, because obviously if you have to stay in jail after the cops arrest you, then you might lose your job, you might lose your housing, your kids aren't being taken care of. So it's very like racist, classist system in the US. And so like bail funds are a huge example of a mutual aid project. They've existed forever, but like during this moment of so much protest where so many people were seeing these outrageous arrests, huge donations that like we've never seen before to bail funds. So mutual aid became really visible in 2020, both because of COVID and because of the uprising. This is just an example here in Seattle. We had a lot of fighting with the cops in the street, and then the cops eventually left one of the precincts here in my neighborhood, and there was this police-free zone. I don't know if this reached the media in the UK, but there was a police-free zone. And what the police-free zone looks like, or any kind of like, maybe you guys remember like Occupy Wall Street period, you know, all over the world, what those places look like is they look like a bunch of mutual aid stands. Like mutual aid is also the infrastructure of moments where we take over public space and kind of break the rules of a society based in private property and capitalism. Like, and when you show, like, so I would spend a lot of time in this police-free zone, you know, doing various kinds of outreach and stuff and mutual aid projects. But when people showed up, people would be like, oh yeah, I drove here from, you know, Idaho. I want to join the movement. I've never done anything like this in my life. The first person they're going to meet is someone at a mutual aid tent, because there's no like welcoming area in a, you know, in a protest. It's like the thing you go to is like, oh, there's someone there I can talk to. They're standing at a table. So it's also like a very vital like inroad to movement building, which I think is, we should notice that like actually the free food stands and the, you know, there's people doing mental health support there, because a lot of people were traumatized by fighting with the cops, or there's people doing hair and nails. It was like very fun. You know, there's people doing big art projects. That's who people meet. And also when people join, when people show up to the movement for the first time, they want to like do something. They don't want to just stand around and listen. They want to like, you know, let me get my hands dirty, you know? And so these were opportunities for people to plug into something and feel like I'm part of this, you know, which is like vital to developing your political identity and, you know, joining the movement for hopefully the rest of your life. I also just want to name that mutual aid is really visible in other kinds of disasters. Like this is a large set of fires in New York. I mean, sorry, in Northern California in 2018, where many people were displaced and we're all living in the Walmart parking lot until the cops came and kicked them out. But it's like the infrastructure of that is also mutual aid. And we also see it during like storms and floods. And especially with this, you know, these kind of boat rescues, the media, often the capitalist media is often like, oh, how nice, those volunteers went and rescued each other, kind of like until the government shows up kind of idea. This idea that it's just complementary to government systems, as opposed to that actually we are like exposing how government systems both create these crises, such as environmental crisis and disasters like these storms, and create the crisis of poverty and create the crisis of, you know, bad levees, you know, in New Orleans during Katrina, and create the crisis of people not having escape routes, you know, like, and that we rescue each other. There's teeth, like, you know, the media wants to often just say it's volunteerism. It just wants to say like, oh, how nice those people, like went and helped each other. And I really am arguing that mutual aid is actually much more threatening to the powers that be, and should be, than sheer volunteerism. It's not complementary to the existing systems. It's a part of opposition, and it's a part of building movements that can tear those systems down. So when we live under these kind of like liberal governments or whatever, these, you all use those words differently. When we live under like kind of capitalist regimes, there's a set of myths about social change that they want us to believe. They want us to believe that social change comes from government, corporate, media, and elites. That like, oh, the big lawsuit will change it. Or if we elect the right person, that'll change it. Or if we get the right story in the big newspaper, that'll change it. They want us to believe that the way change works is that charismatic leaders appeal to elites and show them the truth and change their minds. And then they deliver change to us from the top down. And that the only things ordinary people can do are vote, donate to nonprofits, post on social media, and maybe occasionally go to like a big march. And like that story is a demobilizing story, right? It's designed to keep us in our places, right? The reality is that social change happens only when huge numbers of ordinary people organize together, fight back, disrupt, and make it impossible for extraction and violence to continue. When we stop the pipelines, when we, close down the nuclear facilities, when we shut down the prisons, like that's what stops it. Injustice is not a result of misunderstanding. It's not like, oh, if they knew that war was bad, they would stop. It's like, no, they know exactly what they're doing. And they are always trying to legitimize it by acting like they've cleaned it up, or like now gay people can serve in the military, or now we're going to have we're going to build lithium batteries or whatever, like some other mining project, right? You all know. But actually, this is a fight. We have opponents. There's like the few tiny set of people in the world who are getting almost everything out of this system. And the most people and all the animals and plants and other beings that are actually facing like extreme danger and already experiencing shortened lives, not having healthcare, not having housing, and all the things that people and animals need to be well. So this is like kind of the center of my thinking about this stuff. An example I often use, I don't know how famous the Montgomery bus boycott is in the UK, but in the US, it's like most famous story of like, the civil rights movement, which is the most famous movement in the sort of mainstream US narrative. And that story is often told as if it was like, Martin Luther King Jr. gave a lot of important speeches. And that's the kind of the story of it. And Rosa Parks got arrested on a bus. But in reality, the Montgomery bus boycott is over a year of Black people in Montgomery not using the bus system, which meant that there was a giant mutual aid project run almost entirely by working class Black women, all of whom also had jobs as domestic laborers in white people's houses or as cooks or things like that, right? And they not only they organized walking together when they could walk because it was dangerous because they were harassed. They organized driving each other around. They did huge food projects where they would sell the food to raise money to buy cars to drive each other around so that people didn't have to use the buses. Like the change that happened, it's from a bunch of people that you've never heard of. It's like, so it took so many people. And the story that gets told just cuts that. And it's like, oh, Martin Luther King showed everybody that racism was wrong in a speech. It's like speeches do not stop systems, right? So it's just a good example of how mutual aid is kind of at the center of all of these stories of change, but it gets written out. I also just want to name, and I know you all have probably studied this because you're talking about studying the Black liberation movement, but in the US, amongst radicals, the most important sort of story that we all talk about with mutual aid is the story of the Black Panther Party's survival programs in the 70s. And their most famous one was the free breakfast program, which happened in every city where there was Panther chapter, which was all over, where they would give out free breakfast. And this is like a classic story of mutual aid, where you have Black people experiencing severe poverty. Poverty is very stigmatized. And this is de-individualizing poverty. So it's not like, what's wrong with my family that we can't feed our kids breakfast? It's like, what the fuck is wrong with a country in which Black people are poor? And so the Black Panther Party reoriented that question and asked people to come get this breakfast. And by the way, do you want to organize with us? Do you want to fight all these things that are happening to our community? And also let's feel the power of serving our own needs, that we can serve each other. And they were, also they were armed. They engaged in armed self-defense against the police. Like they were like, the US government is our enemy. It's not something we're trying to fix. It's on our backs, and mutual aid was part of that. It was, and, the US government saw this as very, very, very threatening. The police would raid these breakfasts. They would destroy the food. The head of the FBI at the time, J. Edgar Hoover, said that this was one of the most dangerous activities happening in the United States was breakfast. So as I said, these myths about social change tend to be demobilizing. They encourage us to limit our resistance to strictly like symbolic acts or very passive acts, very individual acts. I would really include social media posting here, because I think there's a kind of like sense that you've done your part because you said your opinion. And it's the same mythology, this liberal mythology, that if we just spread the word, it'll change. And it's like, unfortunately, we don't live under governments that we actually control. Like it's not a knowledge problem. People like war is bad, like poverty is real. We know, I mean, it's true that we always need education, and there's always, there's mythologies that are being spread about immigrants and queer and trans people and all that stuff, but it's not strictly an education problem. People, even if everybody knows that the war in Iraq, I'm 45. The protests against the war in Iraq were very central to my young political life. More people than had ever protested anything in the history of the world protested the war in Iraq. and it's still going on right now. You know, like there's a mismatch. Like, yeah, we need attack. We don't just need to ask nicely, you know, and like, yeah. Yeah, and so it's partly about, you know, stopping expecting anyone else to come save us. And I think this is so true of the environmental disaster. The systems we live under have created it. They are not stopping. We can't ask them to stop. We have to stop them. And in general, the belief that I'm asserting is that the way change happens is only through collective action. And these things are about discouraging collective action, encouraging individual action, or passivity. So mutual aid, the way I define mutual aid is that it is the part of the social movement ecosystem in which we do many different activities and tactics. It's the part that's about survival. It's about our survival needs. So we also drop banners, and we also lay down in front of coal trains, and we also burn down police stations, and we also have rallies, and we also have reading groups. We do so many things in our social movements. Mutual aid is the stuff that's about, hey, we need food, we need to be visited in the hospital, we need somebody to go with this person to court, like all the like basic stuff that's getting people what they need. It's only mutual aid if it's rooted in a shared analysis about what caused these crises. So the systems are to blame, not the people, because the government, social services, that kind of stuff, they blame the people. They're like, oh, you don't have anywhere to live. What's wrong with you? You need to get sober. You need to find Jesus, whatever, the different versions of charity that have existed in different places in time. You need to, it's because you can't get housing because you have a felony record. We say if there's people who are unhoused, it's because of a capitalist housing market, not because there's something wrong with those people, right? So blaming the systems, not blaming the people. And it's only mutual aid if it includes an invitation to collective action. So it's like, yeah, we're going to be doing eviction defense for people. And yes, you come here and you're facing eviction, we will help you. And also, would you like to join our group? And also, or would you like to come to the big housing justice rally next weekend? Or would you like to come protest at this landlord's house with us on Wednesday? You don't have to. We're going to give you eviction defense help if you don't, but it's an opening. It's like, we believe that collective action is what changes things. So we're always building toward more people being part of collective action. I think this is implied, but this sort of the key thing here is distinguishing mutual aid from charity. Charity has always been about celebrating rich people, the kind of European model, Christian model that I think we're all kind of living under, like give alms to the poor to get into heaven. It centers rich people and their valor. It's about blaming and controlling people in crisis. It's like, why are you like this? How did you get here? What's wrong with you? Stigmatizing people in crisis. And it always divides people between deserving and undeserving. And it does this through eligibility criteria. Like you can only get on this housing list if you're sober, or you can only, like that kind of stuff is about moralizing poverty and saying that there's a few deserving poor and mostly undeserving poor. And it legitimizes a system that says some people should be really rich and most people should be fucked, and if you fall to the bottom, there's something wrong with you. So it's also like deeply racist and classist and ableist and sexist, because we know poverty is not evenly distributed, right? Couple more images. This is in January 2020, there was a lot of unhoused people living in Echo Park in Los Angeles, and people in the housing justice movement who were living there or who were supporting people living there through mutual aid projects found out that the city was going to do these raids and come clear people, and they would just put their bodies in front of the sanitation trucks. This is mutual aid. When we block the state from hurting our people, that's an example of mutual aid. It's about immediate survival needs. It's also a beautiful organizing tactic, right? Many of these things are both, so people putting their bodies in front of, and then of course, eventually the city in March 2021 decided to raid the park, and they spent over $1 million to use all this militarized, scary stuff. And thousands of people showed up to try to block the raid, which was really, really beautiful. And it wasn't enough. The cops had so many people and so much equipment. But I think a question a lot of us are asking is, how many people would it take for us to outnumber the cops when it comes to raids of unhoused people's encampments? Like that's something that's like, I'm like, that's our next chapter. Like, how do we make them not get our people? How could we have enough people? And this relates to Saya's question about growth. We need to grow our movements a lot bigger to start to win, or even to start to have better defense. Another example of this in Seattle, after that period, here where we had the no cop zone. Some unhoused people were still living in the park, in a particular part of the park there near the precincts. And in December 2020, the cops decided they were going to raid that. We knew the raid was coming. People built beautiful like barricades like this around the area where they were going to raid. The city spent over $1 million to do a raid. If you just think about the times they spend millions of dollars to raid and how much housing they could build, you know what I'm saying? But instead, I mean, I was walking in that park like a couple of days after the raid. At first, they just occupied the park and you couldn't walk through it for a while. It just like living in a police state for real. And then I was walking through the park and there was like a pair of very, very thick prescription glasses on the ground broken. And I just thought about like that unhoused person, like what would it take for them to get those glasses again? And how are they living and getting around without their glasses? And just like the brutality of these raids, you know, they're murderous. They kill people, and just pushes people to like down the road to a different park, you know. This is an example of just one more. These are just things that inspire me right now. I think this is 2017 in Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee. This undocumented immigrant came home to his house, and ICE came, the immigration authorities came to arrest him, and his neighbors got in a circle around his van and just stayed there and would not let the immigration authorities arrest him for hours. And they brought him food and water, and they just stayed there until the immigration authorities left. And just spontaneously thinking about, could we organize more of that? And there's been a lot of people organizing in different parts of the US, like when the immigration authorities are having roadblocks, ways of letting everybody in the county know so nobody drives down there if they have immigration issues. It's just like, what are the ways we can just like get in their way, in the same way as we would lay down in front of a coal train or, you know, sabotage a oil pipeline, like all of that, you know. This is the last image. I just really love this image from Seth Tabachman. The government doesn't care. We, the people, must help each other. That's where we're at. I really like to be explicit, you know, that my politics are anarchist. I do not think the government is going to save us. I don't think our governments can become, if they're capitalists, they can't become caregiving bodies. Their job is to protect wealth and extraction from the earth and the people. And also, even if you think they could have been caregiving at some point, like it's not happening now, it's all going in the other direction. They're further militarizing, they're further harming poor people. They're building up more militarized borders in Europe, in the US, in Canada, everywhere. Like it's on us, and like the disasters are unfolding, like time's up. We have to support each other and do this combination of work that builds, I think it's disaster prep work, to know people in our communities, to figure out who needs a battery if the lights go out for their medical device, to know, hey, that family's in struggle in this way, like to know how to have each other's backs to survive, especially as conditions get worse. And to do mutual aid work, I think this relates to size questions, to do mutual aid work in a way that is explicitly designed to build more political shared ideas with each other and get more people in the movement. And the last thing I'll say about that is we can never give away enough stuff to each other to solve the problems. Like mutual aid alone, we can't like they've got all the money and the guns, they've like got their boots on everyone's neck. Like any mutual aid project that you're doing, you'll find people are just like, oh no, there's like, we don't have quite enough money or quite enough, like there's just that feeling, because of course they've taken everything. They own all the housing, they own all the land. Like, so we do the mutual aid, we support each other, but we know that we have to be doing the collective action to get the boot off our neck. Like the two things have to go together, and making that explicit when we're doing the mutual aid, like being like, we're here giving out stuff at this encampment of unhoused people, and we're saying like housing for all, and we mean it, you know, like being political while we do it. And like, yeah, you can come to the table and get whatever you need, whether or not you believe what we believe, but we're going to share what we believe. And also, hey, I know they want to build a new jail down the road, and we're so mad about it. Do you want to come? Like just relentlessly inviting people in. If they say no, they can still have water in a tent, but like, so it's not proselytizing in a negative way. Like it's not telling people they have to, it's not like Christianity where it's like, you have to believe this or we're going to like leave you out in the cold. It's like, it's a nonstop invitation, and not being shy about our radical politics and our urgency, you know. Okay, now I'll open it up for everybody.
Thank you so much. So yes, I think that was just what we needed as an overview and an inspiration and the rest of it. And you've begun to answer some of the questions that we've posed. So I wondered to what extent we want to return to the questions that we sent you in the first place, Dean, or that Si has raised. I mean, what shall I do? Shall I read some of the questions that we sent? So the first one, yes, the first one was about connecting the local to the global. And you have shared some thoughts around different emphases that mutual aid projects offer. But I guess in our movement, one of the things that we really want to do is make this connection with debt on that kind of individual, immediate local level, and global international debt, which is a big ask, really. And so we have these end of the month meals, and we're inviting people to join us, partly for food but partly for conversation. And your last point, where you were talking about this non-stop invitation to join us, I think that's the bit that we're quite reticent about, really. I think we're quite reticent about getting those more politicized conversations going. We don't want to feel that you can only come and eat with us if if we can bend your ear, thank you very much. It's kind of, so I wonder whether you do have any advice about how it feels comfortable to get some of those conversations going that help us connect the local individual experience with the global situation.
I think that it can be very like local culturally, like what's the right tone, and I trust you all to know more about that for your particular, for us, probably for each particular gathering, right? Like probably it's different in Sheffield than it is somewhere else. It's an older crowd of people, or it's a younger crowd of people, or and how we draw, because we're also trying to draw people in. So we're trying to promote like, oh, maybe actually some of these people would prefer like a music event, or some of these people would prefer like, we're going to do a movie screening, like, and always having food. Yes. So I think, and then I think just trying to figure out like, what's the way to get this conversation started with this group. For some people, it's like, oh, tell us what you wish was different in your town. And sometimes it's like, oh, we're going to elicit from you your biggest concerns. Like that's what the Young Lords did, the Puerto Rican Liberation Group here in the US that was around the same time as the Black Panthers. They wanted to start a Black Panthers like structure, and they went around the Puerto Rican neighborhoods in New York and asked people, and people were like, we're the most pissed off about how the trash doesn't get picked up in our neighborhoods, and it creates all these problems and rats. And so the first thing they did was they did a trash offensive. They threw all the trash in the streets. They also went down to the city of sanitation and they took all the brooms, like they just did it without asking, and they like went and cleaned the neighborhood. And it was like that's what people in their community were saying they wanted. So figuring out sometimes like content based on people's biggest concerns and biggest areas of overlap, doing stuff that's interactive so that people feel like I got to make something, or like, oh yeah, we're gonna all be writing letters to people in prison during this meal, or if you want to, or the people want to feel not coerced, but they also want chances to like share what they know. Like I think a lot of people want to be able to having the experience of saying that you're angry or scared to people and having them be like, yeah, me too. For a lot of people, they've never had that. Like let's say if their family members are all conservative, or if they're not close to people, like the experience of being like, oh, these people think that it's a problem too, and I'm allowed to get a little more pissed, or, so I think it's really experimental. Like that's going to look so different for different constituencies. People just, I just read stories about this from all over the world. Like in some places where it happened because they would have bonfires in the neighborhood for certain holidays, and that would be when people would really like hash it out. Or for some people it's like someone gets killed by the police, and then we start having meetings and showing movies and having discussions about police violence, or like I think tying it to whatever people care about, and like we need it all, you know what I mean? And it's all related to debt. So it's like, if that neighborhood gets really interested in the health stuff or the housing stuff, it's like kind of like whatever, you know what I mean? Like doing a mutual aid project about anything, or disaster prep is a great one where it's like, you don't even have to have any politics yet to be like, yes, what would we like to have in place if there's likely like big snowstorms here, or if there's likely earthquakes, whatever that region has to worry about. Like all of that can draw people in. And then I think being not shy about your politics. There's a way of saying, I was talking to people in LA, they were having this dilemma because they were doing a charging station for unhoused people for their phones because there's nowhere to charge them, especially once the pandemic happened, people couldn't go into cafes and charge them. And so then they were like, charging their people. And I was like, they were like, we don't want to like proselytize or whatever. And I was like, if someone's standing at the charging station, you can be like, hey, we're just asking everybody, did you know about this thing the city council's doing? We think it's going to be really bad for unhoused people. Like, and they don't have, just being ready, to talk about stuff, even in the one-on-one, with each other as you meet people, and just being like, that's what I'm here for. And there's nothing wrong with that. And if someone says they don't want to, they don't have to,
Yeah, that's really helpful. Okay. Then the second question was touching on our ambition to grow our numbers, really. And, what are the risks of growing too quickly, or what are the risks of not growing too quickly, or whatever, or, something around that, really.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think one of the dangers, a lot of mutual aid programs start and they don't grow. It'll be like 5 people or 20 people start it. And then that problem is it'll shrink over time. Somebody gets sick, somebody has a baby, somebody moves. And so it's like, and the other thing, I didn't say this, but explicitly, but mutual aid historically is the on-ramp to social movements, period. Like, people join social movements mostly through mutual aid, either because they needed something and these people were giving it out and we're like, oh yeah, you know what? We don't think it's your fault that you need that. This is messed up. You want to join us? Or they were like, I'm so pissed about this thing I've been hearing about, or this thing that happened to me before, happened to someone I love. I want to do something, which is so good. I want to do something right now for people suffering, which is this beautiful quality. We want that way more than we want to vote. Like, it's they come from the heart. And so and then you go there and you're like, you find out like, oh, I knew I was pissed about this, but I didn't even know about this other part of the issue, or these people I was working with the food stuff. It turns out they were telling about how the immigration system works. And it's really unfair. I didn't know that the police did this thing, and so that your solidarities grow and you become more a part of a movement, and you often get involved in more tactics. Then you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go, lay down with those people in front of City Hall and say, I won't take it anymore. Like, you start doing more bold stuff and it becomes your community, and you have friends who believe in it too. And so mutual aid is the on-ramp. So we need mutual aid projects to be spaces people can join and get like really participate, not just be like, I came, but I really felt like, Rob and Darcy knew what was going on. And I just kind of like, waited for them to tell me what to do. Because we live in these hierarchical societies in which most of us don't know how to just like have initiative and feel like we can be part of something without either being the boss or just being bossed around. So we need people to feel like, oh yeah, you're invited in. We're going to be transparent about how decisions get made. You get to know everything about how the money works, or how that, whatever. You get to, like, we want your opinion. Like, we're going to extra solicit, like, yeah, do you think it should work differently? Like, do you think it should be on Tuesdays instead of Wednesday? Like, what do you think? Oh, you have a special recipe you want to bring to the, like, whatever. Like, we want people to feel like they're being asked to co-steward instead of just like be junior. We want to look at if there's any hierarchies happening where like some people know what's going on, but people don't really know what's going on. People are going to stay and they're going to grow more skills and become lifelong organizers if they get to like develop leadership inside a mutual aid project. So this is a lot to ask, because it's like, we're not just doing food here. We're doing people building. Like, that's food is like incidental to the people building and to the politics building. Like, yes, absolutely food, but like that, and that is the beautiful glue that brings connection and belonging. But like, how are we getting people more skilled up to just do things they care about with us or with other groups? Like, how are we just making people more active? Even if they like disagree with me a little bit, or they think a different priority, I don't care. You know what I mean? It's like, we just want to build a lot. We are very demobilized under these systems. So I think that's hard, because a lot of groups are just so focused. How many meals did we get out this week? Of course, because people are hungry and it's horrible, but we're never going to get enough meals out if we attack the system. So figuring out, and a lot of the second half of my book that Darcy was showing is about that stuff. It's about like, how do we just make decisions together in a way that includes everybody, so people feel that they co-steward and it's really they're part of the group. They're not just like junior volunteers. How do we deal with conflict when it comes up in the group? What if I'm being really bossy? All that stuff.
That's great.
Great. Yes, people building, absolutely. So you've talked there about a diversity of tactics, so maybe we don't need to push that one any further. And you've also talked about decision-making approaches. I mean, that's a big topic, isn't it? decision-making approaches is a massive topic in its own right. Is there something you could say on it, or do you think that's something we should perhaps explore in a different way?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I just posted in the link. It's so funny, the voice they chose to record the audiobook. You'll see it's like, it seems like a very different genre of book. But if you enjoy an audiobook, there is one. I just posted this link to these workshops that go into some of these themes in detail. Like if you prefer video, like watching or listening to a video to reading, that might be a fun thing for some people. And there's some different stuff in there than in the book. The decision-making piece. So, we mostly live in a capitalist society where we usually don't get a role in decisions. It's like when you're a kid, your parents decide things, or the teacher, the principal, the school, or like you go to work and it's like a boss decides, or you're in church and it's like the hierarchy and the clergy decides. Like most of us have never been in spaces where everybody gets a say. Either you're the boss or you're like the underling. And like, so the kind of social skills we learn are either get my idea through and be right and make everybody do what I want, or keep my head down and kind of like muddle through doing what they think I should do. And so we started trying to build a different society, not based on domination, and it's really hard. And part of it is, even in our groups, even in a small group of 5 or 20 or 30 people, could we make decisions where we think everybody's take is really important? And the goal is not to have, Dean's idea win or Darcy's idea win, but the goal is to have, like if I bring a proposal and I'm like, I think we should do on Thursdays, I think we should do spaghetti, and I think we should do it 7. And Darcy's like, well, Dean, Thursday nights is the night that people meet for the, climate stuff. So maybe we should do Wednesdays. And then, Rob is like, you know what, like, I think that it's going to be easier if we do a rice-based dish for these logistical reasons. And we're just getting a better idea. And so instead of me being like, God, I hate it when they undermine me, I'm like, oh, they've just made the idea better. And maybe I don't like rice, but I'm like, I can live with it. Like, we're learning a different set of skills of like, I'm actually interested in everybody in the group be like liking what we come up with in the end. Because if I'm just like, let's just outvote Darcy, then Darcy will leave the group, because people don't want to do a bunch of unpaid work where they don't get a say, and where they're like, that's not the right way to do it. Like people will leave. We're actually trying to get everyone to stay and to feel like they were heard and feel satisfied, like they had a say. So I'm both learning how to not need to get my exact way, and learning how to speak up, because maybe I'm used a lot of times, like women are socialized to not speak up, or sometimes younger people, or sometimes people of color, sometimes people with disabilities, depending on the situation. Like I'm learning how to be like, I've got an idea, I'm not going to hide it. I'm going to be like, hey, y'all, I actually think we should do this on the weekend. And that's worth it. So like, we're all learning how to like hear each other more and take the risk of speaking. So this is consensus decision-making, where we don't move forward unless everybody can live with it. Because we want everyone to implement it and come along, as opposed to majority rule, which is like the mythology of our fake democracies, in which we're like, well, all the white people in the room outvoted all the people of color, so too bad, or all the men outvoted all the women, fuck that, like we're trying to get everyone to stay. And we might be like, oh, you know what, there's only one immigrant in this room, that person has wisdom that's particularly important that the rest of us might not know. There's only one person who uses a wheelchair in this room, they really know something that we really want to know. So they are not the majority, but they're actually super important. So it's just a really different frame. And part of this is not that every single person in an org has to be there for every decision, because we make a million decisions a minute. Like, are we going to put 2 potatoes or 1 potato in the bag, or whatever, no, but instead we might have teams. So one of the things I promote in the book is like, maybe we have a team that is doing deliveries. Maybe we have a team that, is doing their promotion on social media about these things, whatever. We have different teams, and those teams can implement our plan in their own way and make a million little decisions. But we kind of get a sense of like, what's something we'd all want to meet about? Like if we were ending our food program or something, and what's something that people can just, implement. And if I have a problem with how they implement it, I can be like, oh, hey, Rob, like you put this stuff on social media, and that word actually, it doesn't feel good for people in my community. And it's not the end of the world. And Rob's like, oh, no problem, we'll take it down and fix it. Like, it's okay if we still give feedback on things that the team implemented, but we couldn't have anticipated that decision. But we're trying to know, like, okay, what do we all need to do together, and what do we do in our teams? So it's got an efficiency to it, but it still includes everybody, instead of being like, we're going to have efficiency by having domination from the top.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, I don't know how much. Oh, I was going to. Yes, Rob, if you're going to ask a question or say something, you need to turn your mute off.
I was just going to say, because you said it, that happened to me last week. I wrote a document, and in the wording of how I did it, it was like a very like visioning document. And I was doing it in a voice of someone who was coming to a protest for the first time. And I used the word lame. I was like, it's kind of cool, but it's kind of lame. And someone from a disability network said, I read the document and I loved it, but I don't like when that word is used. And so I just changed it. And it was really nice. You know, I felt like, oh, someone actually read it. You know, that's nice. You know, and yeah, it was really nice. Anyway, just because you said it, I thought I'd give you the actual truth. And
the connection, like now that you've had the experience of being like, wow, this feedback is a gift. Somebody actually read what I wrote. And that person had the experience of being like, oh, Rob's trustworthy, like wants to hear what I have to say, like wants to learn new things. Like this is exactly that. Under our best circumstances, we act that way.
Yeah. Okay, do you have time for the floor to ask some questions?
Yeah, I do, totally.
That's great. Okay, so who would like to ask a question? Is there other people here that have got questions that might flush out some different aspects of this discussion so far? Because there's so much to talk about potentially. You've obviously covered absolutely everything, Dean. Well done. In 20 minutes too. Was that your hand up, Si?
Yes.
Go on then.
Aren't I? It was my hand up. I just want to. I guess I've got two questions, or more to really tease out a little bit more from you, Dean, on where you ended the first part of the talk, the 20 minutes bit, was like I felt I suddenly absolutely got this notion that you go in very clear with your politics. It's not something to be embarrassed about. It's really crucial. It's really important to what you're doing. And I think, I put a couple of photographs up into the chat of where we are, and we have like one banner, but we're often kind of talking about what do we put on the corner of our gazebo. We want to have some words. We want to, and what should we put here? And I think you've said, I think what you said there was just like, yes, we need to go out and do that. We need to get, next time we get that gazebo up, it's got 4 legs. Each one's going to have what we're here for. But how is there any risk in that? Is there any risk in what you're, that I know that we have brilliant conversations with people, but some people really don't want the politics. They don't like it. And that's fine. So we just don't have it. But if you're making yourself very political all around, is there a risk? Maybe I'll just ask that question.
Yeah, I think that the risk is outweighed by the benefit, because then you're doing a couple things. Like, let's say you're one corner of your gazebo said, cancel debt or something, ask us about why we think we should cancel all debt or whatever, and then another corner says like free tea, like it's like both things might draw some people in, and also all people who walked by who are not coming in also saw cancel debt. And that is important. And also the first time we talk to people, I don't know if you all experience this, but sometimes the first time we encounter an idea, we're really defensive. So just because someone doesn't like it when you talk to them doesn't mean it didn't change them, or doesn't mean they won't come back. So I think I think it's more important for us to escalate politics. The danger of accidentally doing charity work, of just being like, we're giving out tea because we're nice people, and not having it have any, I think I'm worried about that. You know what I mean? If you were managing to save lives, through just giving, if you were able to somehow amazingly give out a ton of housing, which none of us can because of our opponents having it all, that might be different. But the kinds of things we're able to give out, I think we should say our message, so it doesn't mean nobody will ever be provoked or disagree. I hope they'll still come get the tea, I still think it's like we need more visibility of these politics and more invitations, and they have plenty of places, which is all of capitalism, to go and get their needs met without their choice. They're forced to do it, and hear the opposite politics, which is you're on your own, private property, hoarding, competition, exploitation. So I think it's worth it, which doesn't mean you won't have provocative chats. And sometimes, I don't know if you ever do this, but I do a lot of public events, and sometimes there'll be somebody in the audience who's like, Dean, this is so fucked up. I can't believe you said we should burn down police stations. We need to, and it's good for the group when that all comes out. The conversation actually gets deeper. It's not a bad thing. You know what I mean? I'm like, yes. Right. So I think it's the same thing standing at the gazebo. Like if someone hears you having that conversation and then they hear how you respond, all of that is political opportunity. All of that. And yeah, we can't win everyone over. Exactly. We don't quite know how it's all going to unfold. All we can do is try to draw people towards this by making it attractive and friendly and warm and true and honest, and deep and authentic. This is what I really care about and why. I'd love to tell you about it. You don't have to agree. Like, I think people often will take up that invitation. Yeah, we shouldn't be self-righteous dicks to people, we should be like, really like, hey, yeah, let me tell you my idea. So we can all practice that because there's a lot of self-righteousness in our communities and our lefty communities that's not very inviting, but yeah. Yeah. Alex, is that you? Yeah.
Yes,
So
Alex,
I just wanted to share something from the Islington experience, which is that one month we actually forgot the banner and it turned out to be for our good because people were coming up and asking us, what's all this about then? But I'm now rethinking that as to whether that is a good idea.
Well, did more people come though? Because maybe that's a brilliant, like maybe you have a handbill.
Approached the stall, not necessarily more people came. Rob has something to add.
Yeah, I think it's really hard because also people, I think we had like a fairly well printed banner and like it could get away with being capitalist, and now because capitalism often mirrors almost like protest art, it's become very popular and mainstream. Rebel or rebel is on like every single product these days. So it felt maybe a little bit like maybe it was people were avoiding it because they felt like they'd immediately have to pay. Whereas when you have nothing, it's very open.
But it said free meal.
It did say free meal, yeah.
And as soon as
I think experimenting, maybe handmade banners. I think it just subculturally in different spaces. Sometimes the handmade stuff, yeah.
Great. Andrew, have you got a question?
I haven't got a question, if that's right. It's kind of just like sharing a bit of reflection from what Dean said and what you've said and what Si said, is that about owning our politics. I think for me, like, because I've kind of come out of Extinction Rebellion where the messaging is really self-righteous and quite inflexible, that's maybe part of why I'm like suddenly allergic to being explicit about why I'm doing something. But I think the difference is we can be explicit, but then be really flexible, be open to having a conversation and adjusting how we think, which is maybe a totally different approach to what Extinction Rebellion was. And that's like, it's quite like that's quite a delicate balance, but I feel like that is, like Dean's saying, much more positive if we can get that balance.
Thanks. Ananya, what are you thinking about?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to say that this was super interesting. Thanks so much. And yeah, it's really got me thinking. I just wanted to ask if what the best way was to keep in touch, because I work as an editor at a magazine and I'm kind of putting together some articles on regenerative cultures and burnout and activism, those sort of issues, and it'll be really great to potentially have you write something. So I just wanted to see how I could contact you about things like that.
Yeah, I'll put my email in the chat in case anybody wants to follow up about stuff.
All right, thanks so much.
Yeah, I think that I just want to acknowledge too, doing something on the street is one of the hardest ways to do outreach politically. And so it's okay that it's hard. I think it's really important. It's like the way Occupy Wall Street, or if you guys had Occupy in your own towns, or if you saw it across the UK, it's hard, making decisions in a big group on the street, it's kind of like the max, and we need it because it's a way to get totally new people. Because when we do stuff only at our social center or whatever, we're going to get more of the usual suspects. So I think it's really, really good, but it's also it's like door knocking. It's unfiltered, people who are mad about it. People are, mystified about, it's just kind of there's no pre-filter to lead people who are more interested in your ideas. So just being kind to yourselves about how that's hard. And that's so important. Si, what do you think?
You're muted, Si.
So I do want to ask my second question, because it's one that Darcy and I sit down and cogitate over the whole time, and it's one which I kind of brought up towards the end of what was when of my first part of the talking. So as I was saying, we didn't want to parachute into a community and saying, here we are, we're doing mutual aid for you, we're going to create a community and blah blah blah. We really didn't want to do that. So we spent quite a number of months building on relationships which had already been started. They weren't new relationships, but because we're really conscious actually within the environmental space, how frontline communities are very often excluded, if not actually excluded. By default, they are excluded, and we really didn't want to go down that route again. And we've had some really great experiences of building with the African and Caribbean and the migrant communities. But so we've done that, and we've now worked within the African and Caribbean Community Association Centre, which has a kitchen so we can heat food, blah blah blah. But we're not within, our white communities, and we're not in our Darcy and I are not in our home community. So the question really is, if you move out of your own community to do a mutual aid project, albeit the intent is that these things get picked up by the community, and then they grow organically from there, and then we're no longer part of it. But at this stage, is there risk in doing that? Is it moving towards the sort of like the charity end, not solidarity? Or are we, from what I've said, does it feel like we're going about it in the right way?
I love this question. It's really complicated, and I think people sometimes try to oversimplify it, right? Because of course we all want to avoid white saviorism and all of that. Those dynamic, they're very colonial dynamics that you're describing, that charity is totally based on that, like missionaries, all that crap. And one thing that I really don't like is when that means that white people or people with money or whoever is like in the privileged category is just like, then I'll do nothing. Like, that's not acceptable. We don't have time for that shit. We all need to be doing a lot. And there's, and I believe in multiracial cross-class organizing. So I think it's great sometimes to have an all Black project that's just Black people, have an all immigrant project that's just, like to have all trans project. Like I've been part of things like, I think that's really useful. And I like to have multiracial, cross-class, multi-gender, intergenerational projects. I think we need both in our social movement ecosystem. And when we work together across difference, and even if I was in an all trans project, there'd be a cross difference, or even if you have an all Black project, there's differences between all those Black people. There's going to be work there. It's unfinishable. And so just letting ourselves be like, oh yeah, this is totally imperfect. I'm showing up here. I'm white. I'm in a community that's predominantly not white. I am probably doing things I don't know I'm doing. People are also encountering me with their cumulative lifetime experiences of racism. I mean, that's all happening. And then being like, okay, so we don't have to be perfect, and it's not going to be smooth and easy because we're trying to change the world. And then being like, yeah, like you're doing just what I would recommend. So it's relationship building, humility, taking feedback. And some people also will rail. I think the other thing that happens is that there is a kind of moment happening where people are having a lot of critiques that spread, and so someone might come up and be like, it's wrong that you're here as white people. And you can be like, okay, that's one opinion. We don't need to shut down because one person said it. We are going to go to all of our relationships and say, like, what do we think about this? And we're going to talk to that person and listen to them, but we don't need to be reactive. We can be like thoughtful and be like, is there anything that like, what's there to learn here? And also so I think one thing that happens is people just like white people especially have a reactivity where whatever the last person of color said, I have to be panicked about it because I want to be perfect and I want to be liked. This isn't about being perfect or liked. This is about making contributions, trying stuff. I think mutual aid is often not harmful, even if these dynamics are there. And so it's like, okay, it's still worth giving out food, but we don't like the way this is being messaged, or one of our volunteers is saying weird stuff, and we want to really do deep political education together about like or actually we realized people in our project don't know that much about the history of Caribbean colonialism and, you know, the UK, and like we all want to learn that, so we're going to read a bunch of books, watch a bunch of movies together to deepen our solidarity. You know, like we can be creative about how to be in the realities of these power dynamics that are very real, but not let it stop us from doing the work entirely, which doesn't, sometimes we do shut down projects because it's not the right thing, or actually like a group of people in that neighborhood want to do it, you know? And I think you're right about trying to do things also in our home neighborhoods, like doing disaster prep and whatnot. But then we might look around and be like, wow, in my home neighborhood, people have a lot better housing that's going to stand up during that storm or fire. People have a lot more room to store water. And in this neighborhood, people don't. And actually, I believe in going to where their danger is worse. And that can be a principled decision, you know? So I think, yeah, it's like, I like what you're saying. It's like, it's going to be imperfect. It's going to be relationship based. And a lot of it is about getting our egos out of it. Like, oh yeah, people might be like, I don't like you here or whatever. And then I get to be like, okay, that's really important information. What part I'm gonna not try to figure it out on myself in my head. I'm gonna talk to my relationships within our group and with all the people we're connected with. You know, whenever mutual aid groups are doing a new project, like who's already working in this neighborhood? What are they doing? What do they need? And then also, if they don't have our politics, we don't need to defer to them. Like, it's also like, you might be bringing a radical politics, and that's okay. Like, not being like, sometimes I see people feel, if they feel like they're the outsider, then they really hide their politics. And like, that's actually, that can be messed up if then you're like, oh no, we're going to support, like, if the most visible thing in this neighborhood is a very capitalist immigrant project, or a very, you know, like, that's, you don't have to support that. You know what I mean? You get to be you, and also tread carefully. Like, I'm not going to show up to the church of this neighborhood, like, it's terrible that you're using styrofoam the first day I'm there. I'm going to first be like, hi, I'm Dean. Like, I want to connect. I believe in this thing called mutual aid. Like, I love what you're doing here. You know what I mean? Whatever. I'm not going to start with my, with the difference that's in a critical way. You know, it's just all that kind of like careful, loving, compassionate, connecting, and then I'm going to definitely stick my foot in my mouth, and I'm going to definitely make mistakes, and try to be non-defensive, and think about who's my support system when I feel embarrassed or scared, you know, or am I overdoing things? Am I like being a martyr and like overworking, you know? Yeah. Hard questions. There's a book I like by Jordan Flaherty about white saviorism. I just think he's pretty smart. I'm putting his name in I think it's called No More Heroes. Yeah. Might be a fun read for people in a mutual aid group together.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean.
Dean.
Does anybody else, anybody that hasn't already contributed or asked a question? Does anybody else want to say anything? No.
I just want to say thanks. Just big thanks.
I'm so glad to be with you all here. I'm going to give you.
Marina, would you like to talk?
Hi there. Thank you so much for the talk. It's not really a question. I think one of the things that is hard for me is like, from one hand, like facing the confrontation you were talking about, that it's a good thing to be open about your politics, and that's going to inevitably cause some confrontation at some point. I think that's something difficult for me, and probably many other people in mutual aid. And the other thing is, like, I think that's something we need to figure out as a group, how to connect this with the environmental movement specifically, as well as that, because I think that's one of the main things we wanted to do when we started, and we still haven't figured out how to bring this global issue to the local community we are going to. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Marina. One thing I would say about that experience of confrontation, I think it's really useful to talk to each other about it. But there's an exercise we often do in groups in the US called the hassle line. I don't know if you guys have ever done it, where like I've seen it, I'll give it a silly example. I've seen it done with fundraising, where it's like, I'm scared to ask people for money, and I need to do it for some reason. And so I ask people for money, and then people practice telling me no, and I practice keep asking, just to be like, oh, it's not a big deal, and so I could practice saying, you all know, I could practice saying why we're here, what we believe in a way that I like to say it. And then you all could say some of the things people have said back at the tent, at the gazebo, and then practice living with, just like, or like, I could be like, oh, I really like the way Rob says it. It's like, when Rob says it, it seems like pretty relaxed. Maybe I can try saying it that way. Or no, I like it better the way Sai says it, or, just try on each other's phrases, because we are in a movement to change the world. So we have to say unpopular ideas. And it's no big deal. It's not personal when people don't like it. So just like figuring out, how can I not take this too personally? How can I enjoy this as an expression of my growing strength in representing the values I have? And then I think the thing about linking the environmental movement with the mutual aid work, I think it's just about making appealing offers. It's just like letting people know about upcoming actions, having people come and do a report back from a cool thing they were part of, showing another documentary, just like, people are lonely, like creating like social spaces where you make friends, where you feel heard, like that's the way. It's like drawing people in with like the sweetness of that, and trying different stuff. Oh, we're going to have a youth event that's going to be, there's going to be poetry, things that different ages like, what I mean? Just like things like just figuring out how to keep pairing the two, but lots of different ways, either chances for action or chances to hear, learn something, or chances to make your voice heard. Some people love to like get together and like, we're going to all make a banner, like banner making parties are such a, and sign making parties for an upcoming event or protest or a visit by some shitty person to the US, to the UK or whatever the thing is that we're, using as an opportunity for organizing.
Dean, somebody has put a message in the chat asking a question about how easily mutual aid can be co-opted, particularly by the state.
Yeah, I think that's part of why we do that kind of assessment about whether it's really mutual aid, because I think the ways that the state co-ops mutual aid, sometimes they just claim credit for it. So like after there was that big Hurricane Sandy in New York, and this, the government totally fucked up and didn't do things for people, and like FEBA was offering things like loans, like they were offering loans to people who'd had their houses destroyed, not like to fix it. I mean, it was just horrible, right? And instead, all these people who'd been part of the Occupy movement did what they called Occupy Sandy, and they did huge disaster relief that was all powered by people in mutual aid. And then the various city officials were like, yes, we did Occupy Sandy. It's so wonderful. They tried to claim it. So that's one thing they do, and we can just keep our message going that like, no, we did this because we had to, because you abandoned people. We can keep refusing that, or refusing to have them come and do a photo op in front of our thing and all that stuff that where they want us to like trance around the city with them or whatever weird things. So we can try to remember that this is oppositional, and we can talk about that in our groups and help us have a clear strategy around that. And then I think, the other thing they do is they criminalize mutual aid a lot, right? They like, come and arrest you for trying to give out food in the park, or they, whatever, that's really common. But I think that if it's really mutual aid and it's really political, it's kind of hard for them to co-opt. That's kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it hard for them to co-opt. There's some examples like here in the US, as you know, we have like the largest prison system in the world and that's ever been in the world. And a lot of us do mutual aid for people inside prisons, including things like prison education programs and stuff. And then the Department of Corrections will be like, look at our wonderful prison that has these programs in it. And we're like all doing them to try to like give basic necessities to people. But it's really awful, right? Because it looks, so that example is really hard, because we don't want to stop doing it because those are our people. But the DOC is going to try to co-opt it, but we all think it's still worth it. And we're part of this broader prison abolition movement, and we're fighting for that. And we're helping people when they get out so that they can join the movement and bring their wisdom. So it's like, sometimes the co-optation is a little bit unavoidable or incidental. And we are just like, we do everything we can to not have it be, to like, how can we message? How can we look at how we're organizing ourselves? Who's in charge? All that stuff. But we also, we're on a try. We know we're trying to save people's lives or support people's basic necessities. That's really important. And we're also clear about our political trajectory and not becoming like it's truly co-opted when they're like, oh no, actually, Dean, we'd like to pay you to, you know, a small stipend to come bring your project kind of inside the DSU. So we do things like we don't take their money. You know, we try to remain autonomous. That's like a key way to stop the co-optation of mutual aid projects by the state, is to remain autonomous. And that can be hard because people love to get paid and stuff. That's what the talk I'm giving on January 5th is about. Those dilemmas about how our opposition will sometimes try to buy us off and kind of collect us as good PR for their brutal systems. So yeah, it's a complicated ongoing tension, but I think the methods are just to make our politics explicit inside the work with each other, which can include having debates. Like you might be in the prison education project with me and I'm a prison abolitionist and you're like, I don't think so, I've never heard of that. And then we're gonna keep working together lovingly, but I'm gonna keep saying what I think about that and we're gonna keep debating it. And it might come up sometime in the group for some important decision, and that's good. And we might even like really disagree, and that's good. You know, just like letting all of that be on the surface instead of trying to make peace and then make ourselves less political.
Brilliant. That's brilliant.
Rob.
I just, again, maybe not a reflection, but actually not a question, but a reflection. Another thing when about somebody's question, and I just wanted to send some love to somebody who's one of our co-founders as well. It's like in the UK today, the nurses have been on strike for the first time in decades. And something that happened during the pandemic was that the Conservative government got out on the street and clapped for the nurses every Thursday, actually a Thursday tonight. About this time, they would be clapping for the nurses. And at the same time, slowly dismantling the healthcare system and ensuring that they're in the terrible system, the place that they are now. And I think that sort of speaks to somebody's question as well about how during COVID, in fact, many of the Conservative members of Parliament congratulated their constituents on taking part in mutual aid when it was their government's policies that had made it there. And so I really loved your response on that. And the other reflection was simply about generosity and the hustle line, and how there's also not only saying no, but also asking people again. Often people are so reactive and trained to be so reactive, and it's not their fault. And sometimes you'll say, do you want free food? And they'll go, no. And then if if they're still in the space and you say, actually, no, and then they have time to see other people, and and you give them some space, and then you bring them back in. And actually the vibe and the generosity that's needed for mutual aid is like, and I think you called it relentless, and I really love that word, that like relentless intention to give and to keep sharing the one thing that makes things bigger, as opposed to capitalism and division. So it's really, really amazing, and forgiving and coming back to things again and saying, oh, you're still there.
Yeah.
So good.
And with each other, like it might be that, like as a trans person, one of the things I experienced many times in my life is people in groups I was in would use my pronoun wrong and would just like, they don't know trans people, and they just imagine, they would just think transphobic things that were erasing from me. And that's not cool. And I want to be in groups where we say that's not cool, but also like maybe you make the mistake like 4 times, and I'm just going to have to keep reminding you. And then hopefully you'll keep apologizing sincerely, and and we're getting somewhere. Instead of like, I can never speak to you again. And obviously people need to do what they need to do. And if people don't want to mess with anybody who makes a certain mistake, fine. But just if I have it in me, if I'm like, oh, Rob keeps saying this thing wrong, but I'm in this group and Darcy and Alex are there, and I know they really see me and they've got my back, and sometimes they correct Rob too. And so I'm not alone. I don't need to think I'm alone. I can feel that solidarity I'm getting from my other friends, and we believe it's worth developing Rob's awareness around this. You know what I mean? Like figuring that balance of generosity that I think we live in a reactive time politically, and people love to write each other off. And we can't afford that. We need everybody.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
You do.
I should probably go, you all, but it's so fun to talk to you.
Yes, I think we've indulged in your company long enough, probably. And so, do people just want to do a very quick checkout? Just little thoughts as we say goodbye to one another?
Just to say, Dean, you've been amazing, and you all have been amazing. You've lifted my spirits at the end of a very tough day.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Marina. I've just seen you. Thanks for your comments as well, Marina. They're really valuable. Anybody else? I knew this was going to be good. It's been great. It's been fantastic. I'm already registered for your event on the 5th, actually. Even though I'm not a person that can really stay up late. I'm going to have a sleep on the settee beforehand so that I can start a meeting at midnight. But yeah.
It'll be recorded, so don't worry.